Hi, this is Carl Leopson at the University of Arizona. Today we're going to talk about a really important part of an IEP. It's called the PLAAFP. It used to be called the PLP. It used to be called the PLEP. Now it's called the PLAAFP, and we'll talk about what that means. The PLAAFP is a statement that's written in the IEP that describes the student's current level of performance, and it's based on what is in the PLAAFP that the objectives in the IEP are written. And we'll talk about 4 important pieces of a PLAAFP. Now, it used to be called the PLP, and then it was called the PLEP. Those stood for present levels of performance and present levels of educational performance. But now it's called the PLAAFP, or the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. Why functional performance? IEPs used to be solely focused on academic performance in reading, writing, and math because they're foundational. But now there's a greater focus on considering functional performance for kids and the skills they need to perform every day and perform socially and engage socially and get the most benefit out of their education. So what must be in a PLAAFP? Well, it has to be current. It's about a kid's current performance, not about their performance 3 years ago. It's not even about their performance 2 years ago. The evaluation data on which you base the PLAAFP has to be current. Relevant. That means it needs to address their performance in the school. It needs to be objective, which means that we're trying to write a statement that will lead to some really objective and measurable goals for a student in their IEP. And finally, it needs to be understandable. Something that you should focus on in writing an IEP is to make it understandable to anybody who would pick it up. If you are a special education professional, you're not always going to write the IEP yourself. It could come from somewhere else, especially with older students. With any student with special education needs who's been identified for special education services who comes into your school, they're going to come with an IEP. It would be great if every IEP that showed up at your doorstep was understandable, and hopefully they will be. It would also be great if every IEP that you sent along with a student to another school was understandable by that school so that they could implement it. Why do we need a PLAAFP? First, it shows that we've used data in making decisions. Somebody could read it and understand that we've used specific data to make the decisions that we're going to make in the IEP, and that's a requirement of law that we use data to make these decisions. It identifies a student's strengths and their needs, so we get a sense of what the student can do and cannot do. It also demonstrates their need for special education. You remember that in every definition of disability in special education, a controlling feature is that a student requires a need for special education services, right? That their disability is affecting their education. So the statement of the PLAAFP includes a statement that says the student needs special education services. And finally, and possibly most importantly, is that the PLAAFP is used to identify IEP goals. So keep one really important thing in mind. If you are going to write a goal or objective in the IEP, you should write in the PLAAFP that there is a need for it. And you shouldn't include any goal in the IEP or objective unless you point out in the PLAAFP that there is a need for that objective. Likewise, you shouldn't have anything written into the PLAAFP that says a student needs something, if they need some kind of educational service or they have some difficulty, you can't point out any difficulty in the PLAAFP unless you later address it in the IEP. 4 major components to the PLAAFP. Okay. Some information that shows that we've used data to gather information for student performance. Strengths of the student. Needs resulting from the disability, and the effect of the disability on progress and involvement in the general education curriculum. So here's a little diagram that shows you parts of the special education process and where the PLAAFP fits in. There's a referral. We receive permission to test. During testing, there's an evaluation report that's generated. And then we have a meeting where we talk about the evaluation report and whether or not the student qualifies for special education services. If the student's found eligible, we then schedule another meeting where we're going to develop the IEP, and we have 30 days to get that done. The first thing you do in the IEP, and there's a section in the IEP where you write the PLAAFP. And based on the PLAAFP, you identify objectives that you're going to write in the IEP and also consider related services for the student. So the evaluations could be benchmark assessments, general observational data taken in a classroom by a teacher, and survey data from a student or a parent or other teachers. About student strengths. So these reflect things that the student has mastered, okay, and they should be in some way related to their difficulties. So how far has the student come, but how much further do they need to go? So we want to concentrate during student strengths on how far the student has come before we talk about how much further they need to go. The third piece is the needs resulting from the disability. So again, keep in mind that you shouldn't write anything into the PLAAFP that is a need unless you're planning on writing an IEP objective to address it. And you shouldn't write any IEP objectives unless you identify that need in the PLAAFP. And finally, there's a requirement that in the PLAAFP you suggest how the student's needs affect their disability, all right, how their disability affects their education. For example, requires social skills instruction to succeed in group tasks, needs supplementary instruction in math to keep pace with peers, would benefit from self-mediated writing strategies. All right. So let's put it all together. Here's an example. A student named Isabel. We have some database info that comes from a formal checklist. We have parent and teacher reports, and we have strengths identified as she is verbally social and makes friends easily, but she has difficulty beginning tasks. Takes 5 to 10 verbal prompts before she begins. And the effect of the disability on general education inclusion is that she will require direct instruction and social skills to participate in general education. Here's an example of a PLAAFP. Now this might not be the entire PLAAFP. This may just be a section of it. It could be several paragraphs long. A review of a formal checklist of social and emotional skills indicates that Isabel is social and successfully makes and maintains friendships. When required to complete difficult tasks, Isabel often avoids these tasks by talking with her friends, and it takes 5 to 10 verbal prompts to get Isabel to begin the task. Once she begins, she almost always completes the task. When she is frustrated, she exhibits extreme emotions, uncontrollable giggling, sobbing, and occasional anger approximately 5 times a week, according to parent and teacher reports. This inhibits her progress in the general education curriculum as she needs direct instruction in social skills. Then you can see that I've beefed up this paragraph from the scenario with a little extra information. And I'd like you to consider doing that too as we practice writing some PLAAFP statements. So what I'd like you to do is, as we go to each scenario, we'll walk through what the scenario is, then stop the video, try writing a PLAAFP statement, and then come back and check and see how it compares to the one that we have in the video. In the area of communication, the student is Erin, and in terms of data-based info, we have anecdotal logs of observations. We have a language assessment by a speech therapist. In terms of strengths, we know that she speaks complete sentences and initiates and responds to greetings. The needs resulting from her disability, she still struggles to maintain conversation about non-self-selected topics. So if you put her with a peer or an adult and someone asks her a question, she can't really keep a conversation going for more than 2 conversational turns. And the effect of the disability on general education inclusion, this communication problem affects her ability to engage in instructional discourse and in her social skills development. So at this point, stop the video for a moment and try to craft a PLAAFP out of this information, and then come back and we'll take a look at the PLAAFP that we've created. So here is the PLAAFP, one example of a PLAAFP that you could create from the scenario information. A review of anecdotal observation logs and a language assessment by a speech therapist shows that Erin is able to speak complete sentences appropriate for her age. She also responds appropriately to peer and adult greetings. Erin has difficulty maintaining conversations about non-self-selected topics and only averages 2 conversational turns before changing the subject. Her conversational difficulties limit Erin's ability to engage in conversations during instruction and group work. They also limit her social interaction with peers. Now you might have something slightly different, but I want to make sure that you can look back at your PLAAFP and at least have all the pieces that you need. Okay? That there is some sentence or 2 that describes the database info that you're basing this on, that you have student strengths, that you describe the needs of the student and how much further they have to go, and then finally that you describe how these needs affect the student's inclusion in the general education environment and why they need special education. Let's take a look now at Jose in a math example. So for Jose, we've gathered district assessments, curriculum-based assessments, and weekly quizzes. And that's all the information. Remember, this information is being looked at probably by a special education professional, like a special education teacher, ahead of time, before the IEP meeting where the IEP is developed. IEPs aren't supposed to be developed ahead of time by a teacher and then brought to the meeting, although it's likely that you may have put something together, some kind of draft pieces, and be ready with information to write the PLAAFP. Until you get really good at writing a PLAAFP, writing one in the meeting is a little tough. But that's sort of where it's expected to be done. So the team is sitting around with this district assessments, curriculum-based assessments, and weekly quizzes, and probably the evaluation report, which is going to also list strengths and needs, and probably also the effect of the disability on gen ed inclusion. So your evaluation report can be a great help in writing a PLAAFP. Strengths for Jose include reading, writing, and comparing numbers to 100. He can skip count by 5s and 10s to 100, and he can do addition and subtraction without regrouping of double-digit numbers, like 23 plus 23. He does have difficulty with addition with regrouping and subtraction with regrouping, and multiplication facts to 100, and in solving word problems. And obviously this is going to have an effect on his inclusion in the general education environment because he is behind grade level, and it affects his ability to calculate grade level problems. So stop the video now and try to write a PLAAFP that includes database info, strengths, needs, and the effect of the disability on the gen ed inclusion. And here's the PLAAFP that we've come up with for Jose. Data on Jose's math difficulties was collected from district assessments, curriculum-based assessments, and weekly quizzes. Jose can read, write, and compare numbers to 100. He can skip count by 5s and 10s to 100, and perform addition and subtraction of double-digit numbers without regrouping. Jose has difficulty performing addition or subtraction of double-digit numbers with regrouping. He also shows difficulty with multiplication facts, both accuracy and fluency, and solving grade-level word problems. These difficulties require direct instruction and skills so that Jose can access the grade-level curriculum. I want you to keep in mind, too, that if your IEPs are being evaluated by a district or a state-level coordinator, and they're trying to determine whether or not your IEP is appropriately written, they're going to go to the PLAAFP. And they're going to look to make sure that the 4 elements are there. And then they're going to look to see that for every difficulty that you have identified, you've also identified objectives and related services to help that student meet those goals or objectives identified in the PLAAFP. Lastly, let's look at Milton and a reading fluency issue. We have information on Milton's reading fluency based on quarterly reading inventories, standardized achievement tests, and teacher observations. In terms of strengths, we know that he's able to read 100% of second grade sight words and 80% of third grade sight words, and he has increased his reading fluency from 1.5 to 2.5 in a year, but he's still a year behind his peers, and he's unable to accurately read grade level instructions and other subject level material. So these difficulties are going to play out in gen ed in terms of his problems in reading grade level material across all subject areas, and we might be able to alleviate this with some direct instruction in reading fluency. One more time, stop the video and then try to write a good PLAAFP that includes all 4 parts. You can spice it up with some additional information if you choose, and in just a moment we'll take a look at one possible answer. Here is Milton's PLAAFP. Data on Milton's reading fluency was collected from quarterly reading inventories, standardized achievement tests, and teacher observations. Milton is able to read 100% of second grade sight words and 80% of third grade sight words. In the past year, his reading fluency increased from 1.5 to 2.5. However, Milton is currently one grade level behind his peers and unable to read grade level instructions. These reading problems affect Milton in accessing all grade level subject texts and will require direct instruction in reading fluency. Now, I'm no great writer, but I need to also tell you that one of the hallmarks of professionalism in a teacher is being able to write without errors, without grievous grammatical or spelling errors. Other professionals, parents, even students look to you as a special education professional to be modeling appropriate writing skills, and you certainly look much more like a professional if your work is easily readable and free of grammar and spelling errors. So I want you to be really careful about that as you move on and take the quiz for this section, which requires you, or requests, that you write 3 more PLAAFPs based on scenario information. And what I'm going to be looking for in those is that you have the 4 basic parts, right? That you include the data that was used to collect the information, that you write about the strengths, that you write about the difficulties, and that you write about how they affect the student's performance in the general education environment and their need for special education services. Next week, we'll start to work on IEP objectives, because that would be the next step. It would be taking a PLAAFP and then writing objectives based on the needs identified in the PLAAFP. See you again online.